Alright, Lena, brace yourself, you're gonna be in for a bit of a ramble. So when talking about hip internal rotation in the side splits, we can't really talk about that with also touching upon both hip positioning and also external rotation. Alright? So as you probably know, we're gonna want some amount of external rotation of the hip as we enter the side splits. And there's two reasons, but the most important one is that our thigh bone is constructed in kind of like this way. So we have the solid bone, and at the top, where it turns into the hip, it has kind of this angle, and then there's a socket, a ball at the end. Alright? Then we have the hip joint, where it attaches, it's kind of a ball, and attaches in like this. So now if I try to just abduct this neutral position, what can happen is that this part of the thigh bone will actually hit and can be limited by the hip socket, limit the motion. But if I externally rotate the hip and thigh bone, then all of a sudden there's going to be more space for us to abduct the leg and get closer towards the full side splits, right? So that is why the external rotation, not internal rotation, is usually the most important factor, and the amount of external rotation we want is going to differ from person to person. But now the way that we can achieve this external rotation needed, specifically for the person, is either we can think about externally rotating the thigh bone, that would be this motion, right? Externally rotating in the joint. And that's also like why most people, I would say most people, find it more comfortable as they get deeper into the position to allow their feet to point up towards the ceiling when they get into the side split. Alright? But actually, it's not only rotating the thigh bone, we can actually also rotate the hip socket in relation to the thigh bone. Alright? So that'd be actually rotating the socket instead of rotating the bony part. Right? And how we achieve this is just by doing the hip tilt, sticking out the butt, doing the twerking motion while in the side split position. Alright? And as before, the amount of external rotation we want, and therefore also the amount of hip tilt we want, is going to vary and differ from person to person. And also, so we can achieve the external rotation either by tilting our hip or by thinking about rotating more from actually the leg, thigh bone, right? And how much we want each of these parts to contribute to the external rotation is going to vary from person to person. But if you're one of those persons where you feel most comfortable allowing the hip tilt to contribute quite a lot to this, then if I tilt my hip a lot, really a lot, then it's basically going to be almost impossible for me at some point, if I really externally rotate a lot, to allow my feet to come off the floor as well. Or maybe I'm just rotated so much in my pelvis that this is actually a very good position for me. I don't need any more external rotation. That's not going to feel nice. And maybe actually it's going to feel more comfortable because I have so much external rotation going on from the tilt of the hip. So for some people in this position, you can actually feel comfortable to think about internally rotating a little bit here from the thigh bone, right? So think that I'm trying to turn my leg downwards, but at the same time I'm twerking my hip, which is moving kind of in the opposite direction. So it would be in this position where I'm tilting my hip a lot, but also trying to internally rotate from my thighs. It would basically be like the socket, the hip joint, is externally rotating, and then the thigh bone is also just internally rotating just a little bit, but we're still going to be in a slight external rotation, like total sum, because the external rotation contribution from the hip tilt will in this case be larger than the internal rotation from rotating the leg actually into internal rotation. Alright? I hope that makes sense. But once again, this is going to be very individual. And usually you don't need to get all technical about it. It's mostly just about finding the position that actually works for you. But it might be helpful to play around with. See if I allow myself to twerk a lot, to tilt the hip a lot, then if it feels better to think about internally rotating from the thigh, and that's completely fine. Alright, ramble out.